All right, we are back with a new video, and today is a slightly different video. Now, obviously, I've been covering Australian Survivor for a bit, and with my weekly power rankings, I talk about how likely each person is to win based on the edit they've received. And again, a lot of that video is based on the edit. And while I do talk about gameplay, to an extent in that video, it hasn't really been that major of a focus so far in the season. But now that we're getting towards the merge, I feel like now is sort of a time to really take a step back and really assess the actual games that are being played. So, again, you can call this pretty much a mid-season player ranking where I'm going to be ranking each player based on the game that they're actually playing. I'm going to do my best to take away the edit to the best of my ability. However, obviously, the big thing about Australian Survivor is obviously there's a lot of information that we just simply don't know because of how unbalanced the edit is. But I'm going to do my best and really try to see the information that we've gotten and try to assess the actual games that are being played. And the way I'm going to set up this video is this is sort of like going to be like two lists. So, like, first, I'm going to be talking about the people that have already been booted and ranking the games of the people that have been booted, and then after that, I'm going to be ranking the games of the people still in the game. So I realize that sort of leads to sort of a clean cutoff, even though I feel like there are definitely people that have already been booted who have played better games than what we've seen from even some of the people that are still in the game. So I feel like that will lead to some wonkiness there. I'm not saying that the highest highest ranked pre-merge boot is somehow playing a worse game than some of the people that are still in the game, but that's just the way I decided to set things up. Now I will be doing a follow-up at the end of the season where I'll be doing a full-on player ranking, ranking everyone's games, like based on how they played. However, I decided that, you know what, we're about halfway through the season and I haven't talked as much about the game as I would have liked. So again, this is just sort of like a mid-season player ranking. So with that out of the way, let's get right into things. So starting off the list at number 24, and again, this is a ranking of the games being played, not so much their boot order or their edit they received. But at number 24, the player I think played the worst game on Australian Survivor is Andy. Yeah, I know this is the first boot and everything, but I feel like there is a serious debate for me between putting him at the bottom versus the next person we'll be talking about. I decided to leave him at the bottom, however, as that other person at least survived one tribal over him. But at the end of the day, I feel like Andy wasn't poised to do well, as it seems like few people were willing to give him a chance. Some of that is due to his reputation as a sneaky player that he garnered his first time playing, but I also feel like he didn't change that much. We heard in the preseason that he wanted to work more on his social game, but it didn't seem like he was effective in doing so. I never got the sense he had many close allies despite being perceived as this leader figure that wanted to control everything. And all that just made him an easy first boot. Now, again, you could argue that he didn't do as much actively wrong to be the first boot, as again, I feel like some factors came down to his perception the first season. However, like when you consider the fact that there are other returning players on the season that also have reputations that were able to get around that, I feel like Andy should be warranted as being a first boot, someone that didn't have too much going for him based on the level of gameplay he demonstrated. So because of that, he's here at number 24. Now moving on to number 23, and we literally have the second boot of the season. Here we have Brianna. And Brianna is an interesting figure to talk about, as she's someone I think had more potential in this season than Andy, and even some of the people we'll be discussing soon. But the reason she's so low on this list is because she squandered that potential and actively made herself a bigger target than she needed to be. She came off as intense and aggressive, which harmed her ability to form deep bonds with people and caused her to fall out of the majority. Even at the first tribal, while Andy was a clear target by the majority, she still got a vote by Alex, which probably speaks to how she was perceived even by that point in the game. And of course, there's also her getting so hung up about the idol hidden at tribal. We see that when she and Chrissy literally race for in the middle of tribal, which immediately made her come off as sketchy. I said this before, but I think she should have let Chrissy just take it, put all that onus onto Chrissy to burn it or go home with it, especially if she thought Shae might have played her idol for her as well. But the main reason I have her above Andy is, again, she at least survived a trouble against Andy. I know that's a criteria that can be a bit wonky sometimes, but I feel like it's just enough to have her above Andy. So because of that, I have her here at number 23. Now we're moving on to number 22, and we're literally sticking with the boot order again here. And here we have Kate. And I really thought about this one and whether I should have her even below Brianna. On one hand, I feel like Kate was incredibly passive in the game. And despite touting her social game, she never made any allies. She was an outsider from the very early on and was voted out at the first tribal she attended. Similar to Andy, I feel like she never had much of a chance, but there are two reasons I have her above Brianna. One is that despite being voted out at her first tribal, that was due to David's idol play, so that's at least an excuse I can give to her. And secondly, Brianna had more potential in the game and was targeted due to actively bad gameplay, while Kate, while not having much potential to begin with, didn't do much actively wrong to be voted out. So that's what settled that dispute for me. However, at the end of the day, Kate didn't exactly do much right either. Like I mentioned, she was very passive in the game and failed to secure a spot within the majority alliance. And while she wasn't the main target at the tribal she went home at, she was still perceived as weak and an easy vote out. You think she would have capitalized more after losing her partner so early, considering the success people like Tyson, Jervis, Natalie, Jeremy had on previous Blood versus Water seasons after losing their partners early. Losing your partner early should be a way of aligning with other people that lose their partners as well and lowering your threat level. But instead, Kate wasn't able to capitalize on either of those things, and her losing her partner simply made her perceived as an easy target. So for all those reasons, I can't really have her too much higher, but I feel like again, she did less actively wrong than Brianna did. And again, she unlike Andy, who also went home at their first tribal, she at least has the excuse of being idled out of the game. She wasn't voted out with the majority of the votes there. So because of that, I have her here number 22. Now we're moving on to number 21. And again, we're kind of sticking with the boot order here. Here we have Alex. And Alex is someone I wish we had more information on, as he was pretty invisible on the show. I like to think Alex as a better player than what he showed from his gameplay this season, as it seems like his back injury really harmed him. It not only prompted his quit, but from what we've seen, it may have also hurt his ability to get within a majority alliance. Obviously, we saw Andy targeting him at the first tribal, which isn't great, although he wasn't in that much danger of going home unless he had an idol. But even then, he votes for Brianna at the first tribal. Now, given what we know about Brianna now, we can kind of see where he was coming from, but the fact that he wasn't even looped into the majority despite being the minority's target is still a knock against this game. He's in the majority for the next vote, and then at his third tribal, he quits. Even then, while he was again being seen as a weakness for his injury, he wasn't the main target heading into that tribal. Had he not quit, it's very likely that either Khan or Sophie would have been voted out there. So I have to give him credit for surviving two tribals and would have at least survived a third had he not quit. But honestly, I don't think he had much of a path beyond that. A lot of that stemming from his injury to where he probably would have been voted out for being a weakness had his tribe kept losing. But it also seems like the injury harmed his ability to build bonds with people. He was rarely seen in the actual game talks, and probably because the injury prevented him from moving around that much. So I feel like that's definitely something that harmed him in the game. Again, he's someone that I feel like probably is a better player than what he showed on the season. But at the end of the day, he wasn't really in the majority that much. And because of that, he was here at number 21. Now we're moving on to number 20, and we're actually breaking off from the boot order at this point, moving up a couple more spots here. And actually, we have Sophie here. And I actually had her above the next person I'll be talking about, mainly because she was at least in control at the very beginning of the game. She builds out alliance with the alpha males and has a very close bond to Ben. We hear people in the early episodes talk about Ben and Sophie as dominating the initial blood tribe. And of course, she's part of the split vote plan at their first tribal, but obviously, she loses control pretty quickly, with her and her alliance being two out in front and everyone else feeling on the outs. And we see Sandra and the others target Sophie, who's perceived as the leader. And she's blindsided. She's voted out of the game, only to be saved by it being a non elimination round. Admittedly, I would have had her around the same spot even if she went home here, but considering she did survive a few more rounds, she should have moved up a couple more spots. She goes over to the water tribe where she should be in a decent position. She has her sister KJ, but she also has several potential options. She could have aligned with her former allies partners like Shae, Chrissy, and Josh. I could have also seen her bond with Mark and Khan. Nina might have been a good option for her, or she could have just hid behind KJ for a bit. She definitely had room to maneuver on this new tribe, and she could have made a deeper run here. But instead, she immediately makes herself a target. I feel like she took her own blindside way too personally. Gets caught up in seeking revenge, which is understandable enough, but at the point where she's blowing up at Jordan, someone that voted with her in the round she was blindsided, is completely ridiculous. And like I said, she's voted out shortly after again, this time for real. And like I said, I feel like Sophie definitely played more actively bad than Alex. But again, she at least survived more rounds. And she definitely had some potential there, but squandered it after returning to the game. And I talked about this already in my power rankings, how I feel like she also wasn't that great socially, even on our initial tribe. She kind of got lucky with the group that she was handed there, which allowed her to have some control there. So that's something at least. But I can't really justify her putting too much higher in this list. So because of that, she's here at number 20. Now we're moving on to number 19. And again, we're sticking with the pre-merge here. And here we have Jay. And Jay is someone who, while I wouldn't consider dominant, he definitely had a core alliance from early on, namely Amy and David. In that group, along with Jesse, Sam, and Sandra, flipped the game on Sophie in the Alpha Males at that second tribal they attend. But then immediately afterwards, that core gets flipped on, and Jay is sniped out of the game simply because he was the least likely person to have an idol played on him. I think of the people that were voted out, Jay did the least amount wrong to be voted out. And unlike someone like Kate, who also didn't do that much actively bad, Jay is someone who had more potential in the game. But ultimately, he was too passive. He seems like someone that could have integrated better with the alpha males, which would have improved his position to where maybe he could have been persuaded to flip or had the majority simply split the vote between Amy and David. But he didn't do that. He was completely blindsided, and he was just sort of sniped out of the game due to, again, not being likely to have an idol played on him. So, again, I feel like I can't put him too low on the list because, again, he didn't do that much actively wrong, but he also wasn't active enough to do much actively right either. And because of that, he's here at number 19. Now moving on to number 18, and again we're sticking with the pre-merge, and we actually have Jace ally here, and here we have Amy. And Amy is interesting. I mean, early on she plays a game largely similar to Jay in that she builds that core with him and David. Despite being in the core responsible for the first Sophie blindside, the core is flipped on the next round, forcing her to use her idol. Mind you, she didn't get the most votes in the vote split, so she technically didn't need to play it still, but still, it's not an ideal situation to lose Jay there. At the swap, she's put in an alright position, having David, having Jordan, and having potential allies in Mel, Nina, Shae, even Josh. She's able to get rid of Sandra, but then after that, her game starts to fall apart. She's never able to expand her core beyond David, and also loses Jordan to Josh, his partner. And I feel like she completely misplays the round she goes home, where rather than focus on Josh, either to align with him or blindside him as a way of getting back with Jordan, she decides to target Jordan for whatever reason. And I know I already discussed this in my power ranking last week, but I think that's the completely wrong move as she makes herself look sketchy by targeting someone she was previously close with. And even if she got her way by blindsiding Jordan, there's no real benefit there. She removes someone that has proven in the past to be willing to work with her. She's leaving a power player, Josh, in the game, and said power player is now upset and directing all of his focus onto her. So no matter which way you slice it, I don't think she approaches the situation well, and she's voted out as a result. So again, not a great game post swap, but the main reason I have her above the people we just mentioned is she was at least more active in the game. And while I don't think she played particularly well at certain points, I think, again, the fact that she was able to build that majority early on, and the fact that she was at least a swing vote during the first Sophie blindside is a big reason I have her here at number 18. Now we're moving on to number 17, and here's an interesting player to talk about. And here we have Sandra. And considering the circumstances, I feel like Sandra did relatively well on the season. However, I struggle to determine how much her performance was a result of good gameplay or how much of it was other people keeping her around as a meat shield. I definitely think there were people keeping her around as a meat shield, namely Jesse and Sam, which allowed her to get to the swap despite being targeted at each of the tribals she attends. But I think a big reason she's taken out the swap is that she was put onto a tribe filled with original water members with no previous bond to her, aside from Nina, and no use keeping her around. And I also think the edit gives her a bit too much credit at points. So there's that. But with all that said, however, I think there are things you can give her credit for. I think the main thing is her ability to build relationships on her starting tribe. She builds very strong relationships with the alpha males, Ben and Croc, but also with people like Michelle that are willing to work with her. Also, while a lot of it stems from her reputation, she at least has people that are willing to keep her around as a meat shield. Mind you, that alone wouldn't have gotten her too deep into the game, but still somewhat impressive how people are willing to keep her around even as others are targeting her. As, again, it's not always a guarantee that people are going to keep you around just because you're a big threat. And finally, while I never thought she had much of a chance to actually win this season, I can at least say that she got swap screwed. Not only did she come to the swap with a 4 to 6 numbers disadvantage, the numbers she did get included people she just blindsided, namely Amy and David, and she also got swapped with Nina, making her threat level completely unmanageable. So again, that's at least an excuse I can give her. But again, I can't put her too high. I never thought she had too much of a chance to win the season. However, I think she handled the situation pretty well. I mean, she didn't do much to screw up her position as a meat shield. I think, again, her ability to build relationships were genuine, at least on some level. I think there were definitely people that would have liked to keep her in the game a bit longer than what she ended up being here. And again, her being swap screwed is at least an excuse I can give her that I can't really give to the people that we've already talked about. So because of that, I have her here number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we literally have the most recent boot left on the board. And here we have Ben. And for me, Ben it was a bit of a debate between Ben and the next person we'll be discussing. So obviously, Ben started out on the Alpha Male Alliance along with the Blood Tribe. And from what we've heard, at least, he and Sophie were the main decision makers of that group, which is something I can give him some credit for. But of course, that group gets flipped on at the Sophie blind side. But then after that, he's able to reintegrate through his relationship with Sandra. And we even hear him talk about aligning with Sandra, although that doesn't really amount to much. He gets an okay swap, where he's able to get by the next few rounds, but he then starts to get targeted due to his threat level and the fact that Shae is still in the game. And we see that come to fruition when he's blindsided in episode 10, only to be saved by a non elimination round. Now, it's unclear whether this non elimination round was planned or if it was a last second change following the Nina medevac, but still, he was blindsided, which is pretty bad. I mean, afterwards, he blames Chrissy and by extension Croc for his blindside, even though the show gives a lot more credit to Jesse, Sam, and Khan for that move, all people he has a lot of trust in. And considering the fact that he was the initial target going to the next round, this is all pretty bad. But then we see Croc decide he wants to save Ben and blindside Jesse, but because of Ben's misread of the tridynamics, he not only doesn't go along with the plan, but he runs to Jesse and Sam, the actual people that blindsided him and were planning to vote him out again, leaks the plan and agrees to vote out the person that was trying to save him. I mean, I'm probably bragging on a bit more than I should have, and I want to think there's more to the situation that we simply just don't know about. But taking at face value, this gameplay is very bad, and we see it immediately come back to bite him the next round when Jesse and Sam revert to their previous plan, blindside Ben once again. And even though he had a chance of surviving once again due to the twist, he obviously loses that innocent out of the game. And again, I mean, Ben is someone I think definitely had some good points this game, but definitely had some questionable reads later on in the game that contributed to his downfall. And even beyond that, I mean, he was saved by a non-elimination round. He could have been saved actually twice by twists after being voted out. And of course, there was his misreads on the situation. Even if he survived and got to the merge, he and Shael would have been massive targets moving forward, so it's unclear whether his longevity would have been all that secure anyway. But I feel like, again, he did make it to the final round before the merge. That's something at least. So because of that, I'm here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and again, we it was a debate between Ben and this person we'll be talking about, but I feel like this person did less actively wrong to be voted out, and I feel like if it wasn't for the round leading up to their boot, I feel like he definitely would have made a deeper run. And here we have Croc, and I feel like Croc played a decent game in the pre-merge, though not without its flaws. He started off building a decent core with the alpha males as well as Sophie. I always got the sense he was perceived as a leader figure for his tribe and one of the more respected people out there. While initially in the majority, he's blindsided at the Sophie vote, which isn't great, but through Sanders' efforts, he's able to reintegrate and become a pivotal swing vote during the J Tribal. At the swap, he integrates pretty well there as well, reuniting with Chrissy, but also connecting with Ben. He finds an idol with Chrissy. He's in the loop for the next few rounds, being part of the split votes against Sophie and Ben. But then he tries to save Ben by putting together a Jesse blindside, which is an interesting decision. While keeping an alpha male around probably hurts his perception to where he's more likely to be targeted moving forward for being a part of this men's club, I understand his desire to weaken Jesse and Sam, who were starting to become the core of the majority at that point. But of course, there are two problems. One is that he can't get Chrissy on his side, who at this point has built a very deep bond with Jesse. But the bigger issue, and the one that really cost him the game, is that Ben wasn't as close to him as he thought. A lot of that stemmed from Ben blaming Chrissy for his blindside at the previous tribal, rather than Jesse, who Ben deeply trusted at this point. And while you can knock Ben for being too loyal to Jesse, you also have to knock Croc for misjudging his relationship there. But obviously, Ben leaks the plan to Jesse, who in turn gets the numbers to blindside Croc. So again, a bit of a weird downfall. And again, there are definitely knocks you can give Croc's game where obviously he's blindsided at the first Sophie vote. And obviously he misreads his relationship with Ben to where Ben immediately flits on him despite that not being in his best interest. But the reason I have Croc above Ben is, again, I feel like he did less actively wrong to be voted out. I feel like if he had survived the round in which he was eliminated, I feel like he definitely could have made it farther in the game then Ben, despite being there with his partner. I mean, the fact that he and Chrissy were one of the few partners to be in the game on the same tribe at the swap and not really being targeted, at least not initially, is of credit to his game. And the fact that he's still being included in the majority at that point is still pretty impressive for me. It's just a matter of, again, the Sophie vote, not great, but also his final round, where, again, it's sort of crazy how it ended up happening. But again, you can at least sort of blame Croc there for not seeing what Ben would have done in response to his move there. So because of that, I'm here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14. And again, this is the final pre merge boot on the list. And for me, it was pretty definitive who this person was going to be. But here we have Nina. And I was pretty impressed by the game Nina played. Now, I think she does, to an extent, suffer from the same issue as Sandra in that the edit probably gives her too much credit for certain things. However, I still am impressed by the game that she played. I mean, at that first round, I mean, yes, while I think the edit gives her too much credit, she's at least a part of, or at least a core figure of the anti vote there. I think that's pretty impressive for her. Again, and from there, she's able to build these very good bonds with much of her tribe. She's never really looked at as a target, despite being Sandra's daughter and the only American on her tribe at that. So I think that's pretty impressive. Like when you get to the swap, again, she's given a pretty bad swap where particularly she's on the same tribe as Sandra, which obviously puts a target on her back. Although, to be fair, Sandra's probably going to be targeted over Nina, but still, she definitely tries her best to keep Sandra in the game, but isn't able to do so. She's forced to cut Sandra there, which isn't great. But I feel like from that point on, she does handle it pretty well. Again, she builds solid relationships with like Josh and a lot of those alpha males. And I feel like she could have propelled that pretty deep into the game, actually, to where yes, the alpha males probably are still going to get targeted. However, she's probably not going to be targeted herself. And I feel like she's definitely someone who's pretty good socially and definitely someone who could have, like adapted well. But obviously the issue is that she's medevac. And for me, that's a massive uh thing that's really out of her control there. So again, the reason I have her at the top of this pre-merge selection is because when you really think about it, she probably shouldn't have been a pre-merge boot. She's someone who definitely was positioned enough to make the merge. And from what we saw from her on the show, with her being able to build bonds with people, I think she could have made it well beyond the merge had she not been medevac. So again, there are definitely plenty of credits I can give to her game. However, she was medevac at the end of the day. Again, she is a pre-merge boot, unfortunately. So because of that, I have her here at number 14. So with that out of the way, we can now talk about the 13 players still in the game. And again, I'll be ranking them based on the games being played, not necessarily their chances of winning based on edit or otherwise. But at number 13, the player I think is playing the worst game for me is Mel. And the main reason I have Mel here is because, well, she was voted out and had to be saved by the fire making twist. I feel like otherwise, like again, it was more or less a double tribal. She was voted out of her tribe there, And for me, that's enough to put her at the bottom. But even beyond that, I mean, I know there's a possibility that there's stuff that she's doing that isn't being shown by the edit, as obviously she's been invisible in the show. But even then, I mean, the stuff that we've seen hasn't been too flattering. I mean, throughout the pre-merge, she's her name has been floated out around a number of times. Like she had a potential to be an early boot even before the swap. At the swap, again, she's not very well positioned either. I mean, she again at the Amy vote, she receives 2 votes against her. There was a possibility she could have been voted out there as well. Like so that's not great either. And again, like who are her allies at this point? I mean, she is going to the merge with her sister Michelle, but even then, like people were talking about how again they see Mel and Michelle as being this big threat. They talked about targeting her in the pre-merge, so none of that's particularly great. But again, she definitely has potential moving forward. I mean, again, she is coming to the merge with Michelle, and while I think both of them will probably be targeted pretty soon, again, there is at least a potential there. But at the end of the day, she was voted out and had to come back in the game through the fire making twist. So because of that, she's here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and I considered putting this person below Mel for a bit, but I decided that their post swap was good enough to elevate them. And here we have David. And obviously, the thing about David is he has a pretty disastrous start to the game. Obviously, he loses his partner Brianna pretty early on, and from there we see in episode 3 him largely blow up his game. Where obviously he becomes a massive target there. He literally gets the majority of the votes at the first tribal they attend, but obviously he's able to save himself with an idol, which isn't ideal, but again, he has an idol at least. Mind you, even then, like it's an idol that he got simply for going on a reward. I mean, it's not even one that he found by searching around camp. So that's probably even a bigger knock than I'm giving him credit for. After that, he's still a pretty prime target for a lot of it. I mean, we know Sandra's going after him, but again, other targets just come along. Like obviously with the J boot, obviously, losing Jay isn't ideal for him either. Again, as he was closely aligned with that core, like so there's that at least. And at the swap, he's able to integrate all right. I mean, obviously he's in the Alpha Males Alliance. Mind you, I think he's at the bottom of that group. And even then, I don't think he's making that many decisions for the group. I would give more credit to Jordy and Josh for that. So again, I can't give him too much credit there. And now coming into the merge, he's kind of a non-threat to where again, I don't see people necessarily targeting him for being a big threat. Now, I could still see him possibly being an early recruit. I mean, because who is he even? Especially if that alpha male group, starts to become targeted, he's probably the most expendable person there. But I can also see him being dragged to the end, like as a non-threat. And obviously that's not ideal either, as again, I don't see how he wins a jury vote. I mean, who knows? Maybe he could step it up. Maybe he gets to the end like with like a goat or something, but again, it's just sort of hard for me to see how he wins the game, both from like a position standpoint, but also from him doing what's in his best interest. And again, I do give him credit for integrating into a majority to an extent, but even then, I can't give him too much credit because he does seem to be at the bottom of that group. So because of that, I'm here number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11, and we have someone who's kind of similar in that they haven't played that great of a game, but like they do have a bit more credit going for them. And here we have Michelle. And again, Michelle has kind of been scraping through the bottom for a lot of it. I mean, early on, like she is again discussed as a potential target, but it, again is later able to align with Sandra, kind of being her second in command to an extent. But then we get to the swap where she's separated from Sandra, and from that point on, she's just kind of scraping on by. I mean, again, like at the Sandra vote, I mean, yeah, she does uh like lose her there. Obviously, at the Sophie vote, she's in the majority there, like being part of that vote split plan. She's part of the Croc blind side through her relationship with Ben, and then she's blindsided at the Ben vote. So not a great series of events for her there. I feel like since Sandra's left, she's kind of been a bit more passive, and again, she's still being talked about as a potential target despite not being that big of a threat. It seems like again, she will be going into the merge with Mel, and again, maybe something can happen there, but again, I think what's more than likely going to happen is that Mel and Michelle are going to be the first couple targeted right at the merge. There's a possibility the alpha males could be targeted, but I wouldn't be surprised if they decide to go after them as a way of breaking them up to an extent. So that's definitely a knock against her. But again, I decided to have them above David and Mel because again, Mel was voted out of her tribe, saved by a twist. And David, again, got the majority of the votes at his first tribal, but was able to play an idol there. Michelle hasn't actually gotten a vote against her. That's enough to put her here at number 11, but still not that great of a game at the end of the day. I can't really put her too much higher. She's here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10. And again, we have another person that's largely been at the bottom for a lot of the game, but I have a bit more confidence in their ability to fly under the radar. And here we have Shae. And again, Shae has had a pretty bumpy ride up to this point. I mean, early on, she was aligned with Brianna, but I can even find an idol with her, but obviously is forced to lose her at that second tribal. Not great there. From that point on, like she's not in that great of a position either, but like is able to avoid being targeted at the swap, I mean, she's put in an okay position, but even then, like, there are definitely talks about her being the target there. Obviously, she's in the majority for the Sandra vote, in the majority for the Amy vote as well. Like, oh, but along the way, she also wastes her idol on herself, which isn't ideal either. And now, I mean, in the later part of the swap, she is starting to be targeted due to her relationship with Ben and how like she's a physical threat and how Ben's also a physical threat and how if they get to the merge together, then obviously they're going to, like end up like dominating the game. So like that's not an ideal position to be put in there. She's aligned with Mel, but again, Mel is someone that's targeted, like is voted out by her tribe, but is later able to save herself through fire, but obviously in the process loses Ben as a result. Not particularly great there. And again, the story of Shael has been being aligned with people that exit the game soon after. I mean, she was aligned with Brianna early on. She loses Brianna early on. She was also aligned with Nina and even gets swapped with Nina, but loses her there due to a medevac. And obviously, she was kind of aligned with Mel as well and could have lost her. And then obviously, she loses her partner in Ben. So I think, again, it's kind of been a pretty unfortunate game for her where she's kind of been at the bottom for a lot of it. And even in this most recent round, the reason she isn't voted out is because she wins individual immunity. So that's a big knock against her as well. There's definitely a lot of issues with her game and her finding her foothold in it. But the main reason I have her above the people we just mentioned is because I feel like she has potential now to fly under the radar. I mean, now that Ben is out of the game, I feel like she can come into the merge and potentially like lower her threat level. Now, will it work? I'm not too sure, but I think again, she's in a better position to do so now than she was like even a couple rounds ago where the big worry was about her and Ben getting to the merge together. With Ben out of the game, I feel a bit more confident about her, but she's still in a pretty rocky position. There were definitely points where she could have been targeted. So because of that, I have her here number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have probably the biggest drop off between this person's position on the power rankings and their position here, as I feel like their edit is pretty strong, but the actual game that they're playing is a bit more messy. And here we have Chrissy. And like I said, I feel like Chrissy is a front runner simply due to her edit. I mean, she's definitely gotten a consistent presence on the show. Like she is supposed to be a rooting interest there. However, her actual game is kind of messy. I mean, obviously, she's looked as an early target due to her challenge weakness and the fact that she's one of the older people there. She gets 2 votes at the Brianna tribal, which isn't great. There's also the whole debacle of the idol hidden at tribal, where she gets a second clue. She literally like races to get it. I mean, to be fair, she probably needed it more than Brianna did, but still, that's not an ideal situation to be in. She immediately has to play it, which isn't ideal either. And obviously from there, like she's kind of in an okay position. I mean, like, there's definitely a chance she could be targeted, but again, is able to scrape them by through there at the swap, she gets a pretty good swap where obviously she's there with Croc, but is also there with potential allies, like a decent number of people from her original tribe, like Khan and KJ and Sophie. Although Sophie's an easy target there, she's able to get in the majority through there through her relationship with Croc, but also with a lot of her original Blood Tribe members. And she is kind of in the know for the next few rounds, mind you. I think Croc is kind of helping her along strategically, sort of helping her understand what's happening in the game. But then obviously later on we see her build this really tight bond with Jesse. And this bond is so strong that when Croc decides it's time to flip on Jesse, like she's unwilling to go along with the plan, which isn't ideal. There's also the fact that Ben blames her for his blindside, which is pretty bad. Like, some of that is her fault, and that she leaks the plan to Ben before the tribal, which is obviously pretty bad. But again, like Ben sees her as the main orchestrator there, and that's the main rift that causes Ben to not trust Croc when he proposes the Jesse blindside, which causes him to go to Jesse, leak the plan, and put together a Croc blindside. And then obviously she loses Croc at the tribal. So again, it's sort of crazy how this ends up happening. But you do have to follow Chrissy to an extent for
like slighting Ben to the point where he blames her and through extension doesn't really trust Croc. So I kind of blame her there. And then at the next tribal, she's in the majority there. So again, she's in the majority for a decent amount of the pre-merge here. Obviously, she loses Croc on the way, but it's still in the majority for a decent amount there. But obviously, there are knocks, namely the fact that she could have been an early boot, like had things not shaken out the way that they did. Also, the fact that she again played an idol for herself at the first opportunity, not right there. And obviously, while she finds a Croc an idol later with Croc, like obviously she loses that along with Croc, and obviously the fact that Ben blames her for like the his blind side, despite the fact that Jesse was the one orchestrating that. And obviously, there's her relationship with Jesse as well, which obviously she trusts him way too much right now, despite not really being a part of his endgame plans. So again, she'll definitely need to be playing more actively in the post merge. I think she'll do it. I think she'll be able to get in the majority somehow, maybe be a factor there. But I think the other thing going against her is that I feel like she'll have a hard time actually getting to the very end, as she's someone who, again, definitely could come off as being a quote unquote jury threat for being too likable, or someone who would definitely win a jury vote, even though I'm not entirely sure that's true at this point. But I think she definitely has the makings of creating that perception for herself, which would cause her to get targeted before the end. But again, like there's still enough there to have her here at number 9.
Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have another really weird game to talk about. And sort of similar to Chrissy, this person has been the majority for a decent amount of it, even if there have been some wonky circumstances. And here we have Jordan, and Jordan's a weird game to talk about. He's in the majority early on, being that alpha male alliance, which is obviously flipped on at the Sophie boot. But even then, he has a decent relationship with Amy, which allows him to reintegrate pretty well there. He's able to get on by the next few rounds. Obviously, at the swap, like he's handed a pretty decent swap as well. Like he's there with Josh, like his loved one. He's there with a lot of men as well that he can align with, namely Jordy, Mark, and David. Obviously, he's still there with Amy as well. So he definitely had some, potential moving forward based on this position. However, he does make some missteps along the way. Like he completely isolates Amy to the point where Amy decides to target him, which is sort of crazy on Amy's end, like the fact that like she was aligned with Jordan previously. She gets upset because he gets closer to Josh, his loved one, and so his response is to target him instead of Josh. So obviously you have to knock Jordan to the obviously one isolate his relationship with Amy, but also get Amy to target him, even though it was in his best interest to target Josh as a way of getting back with him. So that's definitely a big knock there. Obviously has to vote out Amy as a result of that. Moving forward, like he is in the majority still, but again, he's there with Josh. He's going to get to the merge with Josh. So there's definitely plenty of pros you can attribute to his game. However, the main reason I have him this low is because, well, one, the whole Amy situation is pretty bad on his end. But the other reason is I feel like, again, I feel like he's one of these people who, if and when the Alpha Male Alliance gets turned on, he's definitely one of the first casualties there, along with David. I mean, I could see like other people like Josh and Jordy potentially being targeted. They want to go right for the jugular. However, Jordan is someone who I feel like has sort of put all of his eggs behind this alpha male alliance. Is that now once that group gets flipped on, either he's someone who's taken out for being too expendable or the most expendable person in that group, or he's someone who's left with no options, which isn't great in my opinion. So that's a big reason that I'm not feeling too confident about his game position at the time being. But again, like he still has Josh, like, and again, there is a possibility that if they go after the leadership first, then he could scrape by there. But it's just a matter of what his options are after that group gets flipped on. As it seems like for the time being that all of his eggs are in that alpha male basket, and it's unclear where his options are going to be once he loses that. So that's a big reason that I have him here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and this is another pretty interesting person to talk about. And here we have KJ, and KJ has played a pretty weird game up to this point as well. Obviously, she's in the majority to start off with, but I never got the sense that she was really a core within the majority. Mind you, we saw her talk with Nina during the premiere when they were putting together the Andy blind side, suggesting that they were kind of an alliance, but we never really see that amount to much. She is in the majority for a decent amount of the pre merge, so I mean, I can't really say too much there. The swap is a bit more wonky for her, where obviously she gets swapped with Sophie, like obviously her sister, like and someone who has at this point made herself a bit of a pariah.
And she recognizes that this has the potential to blow up her game due to the threat level, but also Sophie's antics. And obviously it isn't great. She has to cut Sophie at the first opportunity there. But even after that, she's kind of on the bottom to where her and Shae are in a lot of danger if they go back to tribal. But along the way, she is sort of helped. Like she gets a vote against her at the kidnap tribal, which allows her to be eligible to be voted into the other tribe, which ends up happening. And obviously that isn't great. That, she is being seen as a target, but through her position at the bottom, like she gets onto the other tribe where obviously she's put in a bit of a better position where she's able to infiltrate this men's alliance, sort of being this close person to Jordy as well as other people within that group. She's able to build a foothold for her there. But then obviously at the most recent tribal, she was seen as a target there, largely because Shael won immunity, but even then, she's able to be spared through her relationship with the men's alliance. She's able to be spared over Mel there. Not great that she's being targeted in the first place, or at least seen as an option to be targeted there. But again, her relationship with the men's alliance allows her to stay there. And now she's entering the merge in a pretty interesting position where she's obviously affiliated with this men's alliance, which has allowed her to stay even after getting swapped multiple times. And I think she definitely has options for herself moving forward. Where I think, if things shake out, she could definitely go back to some of her original Water Tribe members, even if a lot of them are out of the game at this point. I think she definitely has a number of options moving forward. And given that she's a super fan, I feel like she is able to know that she needs to, have a plan for herself after she flipped on this alpha male group because she's using them as a shield for the time being. We know that she's planning to flip on them at some point. It's just a matter of where she's going to go after that breaks up. And I think she'll be able to find those options for herself. And I'm pretty impressed by her up to this point, even if her position hasn't been super ideal up to this point. So because of that, I have her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and I kind of went back and forth on this person a bit, but I figured this was a good spot to put him. And here we have Khan, and Khan has played a good game up to this point. I mean, obviously he's been in a pretty prime position throughout a lot of this pre-merge. He was a dominant force on his initial tribe. Like a lot of people saw the tribe sort of revolving around him. Mind you, we know that there were people that recognized how threatening he was, even the pre-merge, as we saw people like Mark talk about the need to blindside him at some point. He definitely gets benefited at the round where Alex quits the game, where had that not happened, there's a decent chance that he could have been blindsided there. Mind you, he had an idol, but still, he remains a pretty big threat throughout a lot of the pre-merge due to his idol, but also because of his general perception in the game. There's talk of him, people wanting to flush his idol. But the crazy thing is that he actually still has it at this point. Like the fact that people have talked multiple times about wanting to flush his idol, but yet that hasn't actually happened is pretty impressive on his end. Obviously, at the swap, he's handed a pretty decent position. Obviously, he's with a lot of his original Water Tribe members. But he also does a decent job building bonds with people like Sam and Jesse. He's sort of blending into the majority there. However, I also have the sense that he could be used as a figurehead by Jesse and Sam. Especially now with Croc gone, he's definitely the more prominent figure within that group. And coming into the merge, I'm not too sure where he will stand simply from a gameplay perspective because on one hand, I do find it impressive how he has made it to this point without being having to waste his idol, even if they're having people talking about the need to flush it. But obviously, that can't really go on forever. There has to be a point where people are going to have to force him to flush that idol. So I think that's definitely something going for him against him. Also, the fact that he is sort of this out in front figure, and I feel like Jesse and Sam are the ones running the game, and that he could simply being used as a figurehead by them as sort of this out in front figure. So that's not particularly great. And obviously, the other factor is that it's unclear who his true allies are outside of people like Chrissy or KJ. And even then, it's unclear where his endgame is for the time being. So I think he'll definitely need to work on that to a degree. But I still think he's played pretty well up to this point in the pre-merge. It's just I'm not sure where his endgame is for the time being. So because of that, he's here at number 6.
Now we're moving on to number 5, and this is definitely a weird person to talk about from a pure game perspective. And here we have Josh, and Josh is weird because obviously he's been pretty invisible in the edit, and through that, it's sort of hard to gauge how he actually is doing in the game. But from the stuff we've actually seen, he seems to be playing relatively well. I mean, he was in the majority early on in the game, sort of being in the group there. Mind you, he wasn't in the vote at the very beginning of the game. He did vote for Alex, but after that, he does a pretty good job of being in the majority, sticking with that water tribe during a lot of the pre-swap. And obviously, at the swap, he gets a pretty favorable swap as well, where he's obviously reunited with Jordan, his loved one. He's also there with Jordy, one of his allies, and obviously he's also there with a decent amount of his original water tribe there as well. And through that, he's in a pretty solid spot. I mean, like he's sort of a key piece of that alpha male alliance. Mind you, I think Jordy's probably better positioned than he is, and probably more the one calling the shots. But still, I mean, Josh is pretty well positioned there. And I think that was really highlighted during the round where Amy went out, where despite Josh being a reason why Jordan, one of her allies, sort of starts to distance himself from her, Amy doesn't actually decide to target Josh. He instead decides to target Jordan, even though Jordan was her ally, and you'd think that, like she would try to get back with Jordan, like someone that she already has a previous relationship with. But the fact that she decides to target Jordan and blame him more for their isolation than Josh, the person that Jordan has actually been spending more time with, which makes sense as their partners in the game. I think that says something about Josh's game, at least. Again, I think that's pretty impressive on his end. And again, I think he's going to emerge decently well suited there. Now, mind you, I don't think he's particularly positioned well to get to the very end. I mean, like I said, I think his partner Jordan has a lot of potential to be voted out in the next couple rounds. And I think if the alpha male group starts to crumble, then I think Josh could be in a lot of danger there. So that's a big reason I can't have him too much higher on the list. Again, obviously, the other reason is that we just don't know as much about what his position was pre-swap. But I think based on what we've seen, again, there's enough there. Like the fact that Amy wouldn't target him, and also the fact that he's in that majority group, is enough to where I have him here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and this is sort of a weird person to talk about as, again, I think from a pure game standpoint, this person has been playing relatively well. Although, again, I think there are definitely issues this person will encounter in the post merge. However, if we're going off edit, I have a lot of reason to think they'll overcome those issues. And here we have Mark. And again, Mark has been a top contender for me all season long. I don't think, even with this latest batch of episodes showing obviously, some negativity with talk of him being a big threat post merge, as well as Jordy picking up on him finding his idol, I think obviously those are some knocks to his edit. But by and large, Mark has been a front runner edgically. And I feel like he will ultimately overcome the issues with his current game position to actually win the game, or at least come close to winning the game. If we're talking purely game standpoint, I think he's played relatively well for the most part. I mean, he's been in the majority for pretty much the entire pre-merge. Early on, he was in the majority there, and again, never really looked at as much of a threat. Mind you, he did vote for Chrissy at the Brianna tribal, which isn't ideal, but again, he's in the majority for that stage of the game. A lot of people trust him. A lot of people seem to respect him, sort of approach him to clue him in on things. I mean, except for the Chrissy vote. And obviously, the other thing is his relationship to Khan, who is technically the person that dominates a lot of that original water tribe. Obviously, Mark decides to align with Khan, recognizing that sort of to help Khan ease himself into a false sense of security. And there's a good chance that obviously had Alex not quit the game, that Mark would have pulled the trigger and blindsided Khan there. So I think that's definitely something you can give him credit for. Post swap, I mean, obviously he makes the correct decision by sticking with the Blood Tribe, as obviously that has a lot of his original tribe members there, and also it's a way of keeping himself separated from Sam. I think that's a solid decision there. And we see him being in the majority, sort of being aligned with this alpha male group, while also having the trust of a lot of the people outside of that group. I mean, plenty of people talked about how great he is, how they want to work with him. And again, he's pretty well positioned during that stage of the game, never really in much danger of going home. Now, obviously, there are two big knocks I have against his current game position. One is, again, the fact that Jordy knows about its idol. I feel like Jordy will attempt to use that against Mark at some point. It's just a matter of when. And the other issue is that based on his archetype, he is someone that should be a big physical threat in the post merge. I mean, we literally got talk about this in last week's batch of episodes where people recognize that he should be this big physical threat. And mind you, that doesn't lead to them targeting him, but I mean, it could. I mean, I feel like that's definitely something he will have to face in the post merge, whether he likes it or not. And again, it'll definitely make things harder for him. Now, again, I should say at the end of the day that I think he will ultimately overcome those issues. And again, if Sam isn't the winner, then he most likely will overcome those issues and probably win the game as a result. But if we're just going strictly off game position right now in the pre merge, I think there's a lot of credit you can get the Mark. But obviously, those knocks keep him from being higher in the list. So because of that, I have Mark here number four. Now we're moving on to number three, and I've been pretty impressed by this person's play. Mind you, their edit has been inconsistent, but I even in that absence, I have talked about how good this person has been playing. And here we have Jordy, and again, I've been very impressed by Jordy's gameplay this season. Again, at the beginning, like he's sort of well positioned on the water tribe, mind you. I'm not too sure whether he's in the core of things, but we hear definitely early on people talking about people liking him, and he's never really much danger there. Post swap is where he really steps up his game, and obviously he builds that core of him, Josh, Mark, and Jordan, along with David, I guess. You know, like he is sort of an integral piece there. Like he's a big contributor to the Amy vote. You know, like so you got to give him credit there. Sandra vote's kind of nothing, but whatever. And again, he's sort of in a very strong position during that post swap as well, and obviously, we also see him start to question Mark a bit. Obviously, he catches Mark finding the idol, which is something he could definitely use against him. And I think coming into the merge, he's definitely one of the better positioned people in the game, to where even if the alpha male group crumbles, he definitely has other options there. He can lean into his relationship with KJ, for example. Even though edgically, I feel like he's still being set up for a downfall in that regard, I still think Jordy has options, or at least more options than what a lot of the other people in the alpha male group would have if that group gets turned on in the early merge, which I think there's a good chance of that happening. Again, I feel like Jordy has done great jobs socially, building bonds with most of his tribe, and I think that will carry over into the post merge. And I wouldn't be surprised if he gets towards the end game at this point. Now, again, edgically, I don't think he will actually win the game at the end. I think he'll be more so a major figure and a major force in the post merge. But if we're just looking at game position, again, he's done a great job at building bonds with a lot of his tribe, which I expected from him in coming into the season. And I think that will continue into the post merge, where it doesn't seem like anyone's directly targeting Jordy, which is kind of insane when you think about it. So again, I think there's a lot of credit you can give to Jordy, but I think there are two other people that I feel more assured about with their games. Some of that comes from information, but I also think it comes from active gameplay as well. Where obviously Jordy hasn't been to as many tribals as like some of these other people. I believe he has only been to what like four tribals pre-merge, so that's definitely something to consider as well. So again, at the end of the day, I feel like Jordy's been played a pretty strong game, but I feel like there are other people that we have more information on. So because of that, I had to leave him here at number three. Now we're moving on to number two. And again, I feel like these are the pretty clear top two. It's just a matter of the order. But at number two, we have Jesse. And it was actually sort of a debate for me between Jesse and Jordy, as I feel like Jordy has been targeted less throughout the pre merge, whereas obviously Jesse, yeah, like there was a chance he could have been blindsided had Ben trusted Croc more. But I think you also have to give Jesse a lot of credit for having a good enough relationship with Ben to where Ben didn't want to do something that was in his best interest. So I think that's definitely a credit you can give to Jesse. But I think the real thing that propels Jesse above Jordy is just information, where I feel like we have more evidence of Jesse playing a strong game than Jordy has. A lot of that is through the edit, but I think it also shines through the actual gameplay happening as well. So obviously, early on, Jesse is in a very strong position. He sort of builds this good bond with uh, Sam, and I feel like through that, like he is sort of able to be in a central position. He's also using Sandra as a meat shield, and he becomes a crucial swing vote during the J boot. He gets a pretty benchful swap as well, where he still has Sam, along with several big targets he has in front of them. We see him bond with most of the tribe there, particularly with Ben, Chrissy, and Khan, and he's the main orchestrator of really both Ben blindsides. Now, obviously, again, you still have to fault him to a degree for wanting to cut someone that is pretty loyal to him. But considering there are others on the tribe that wanted to target him as well, he can only do so much. He obviously gets the blindside through only for it to be a non elimination round. And again, I think what I find really impressive about Jesse is that despite being the main orchestrator of the Ben blindside, Ben never suspects much from Jesse, opting to put much of the blame on the Chrissy. Now, again, I think some of that is due to Chrissy like being bad socially. I mean, we see Jesse still want to blindside Ben even after the first blindside. Again, you could argue about that. And then you have Croc again wanting to blindside Jesse, which isn't ideal. But again, then we see his relationship with Ben come through, where despite being the actual person that was trying to get him out, Ben is trusting enough of Jesse to tell him that Croc is trying to blindside Jesse, not knowing that it's really an effort to save Ben. So it's just sort of an insane situation, and I have to give Jesse a lot of credit for that. He's obviously able to flip the vote onto Croc without too much difficulty. And then, of course, the next round, he does lead the Ben blindside once again. Again, you can question that. Again, I feel like the thing about Jesse that puts him above Jordy is that, yes, on one hand, we have seen Jesse be in more danger than Jordy, obviously with Croc, but we've also seen more evidence of Jesse's strong social bonds contributing to him being in a strong position. To again, the Ben thing is such a major boon for me. The fact that Ben wanted to work with him even after he tried to blindside him. So that's just pretty crazy to think about. And I think post merge, I think Jesse has what it takes to, sort of fly under the radar a bit. I mean, he still has his relationship with Sam, who's obviously going to be reunited with Mark, and obviously that would be an issue for him at the end game. But I think coming into the merge is actually a pretty solid position for him to be in, where I think Mark recognizes the need to have allies, especially if he is going to be this big physical threat. And I think, like Jesse could be a source of that. On the other hand, if Jordy decides to take a shot at Mark, then I think obviously Jordy's probably going to lose that battle based on the edit. But I feel like even if that happens, then Jesse should be in a solid position. So I think those are all things going in Jesse's favor. But I feel like there's one other person I feel like is playing a more solid game than Jesse. So because of that, I have him here number two. And now, number one, the person I think is playing the best game so far on Australian Survivor is Sam. And again, I feel like Sam has a lot of the upsides of the people we have talked about earlier with relatively few downsides. So, obviously, she's in a very strong position in the pre merge, obviously, has a good relationship with Jesse, but also with most of the people on her tribe, is in the majority for a decent chunk of that. She builds a very strong bond with Sophie, which obviously sort of comes back to bite her after she blindsides Sophie. Like she's sort of a swing vote there, and you can question like what, like whether that was really a good move for Sam, as it really benefited everyone else more than Sam herself. Like, so, but there wasn't really the votes there to keep Sophie, so you could take that or leave that. What you can fault Sam a bit for is obviously Sophie taking most of the blame on putting it onto Sam for her blindside, but at that point, like they were on different tribes by that point. And from what we saw, it doesn't really seem to hurt Sam that much anyway. I mean, because Sophie really makes herself a pariah to where none of the heat that Sam takes from Sophie really like affects her position in the game. So even again, like while the Sophie round isn't ideal for her, it doesn't really hurt her as much as like some other points in other people's games. So there's that. At the swap, again, she's in a very favorable position there where she's still with Jesse there, but also has some pretty big targets ahead of her, namely people like Ben, Croc, and Kun, all of which she's able to build decent relationships with. So you can give her a lot of credit there. And again, she's sort of in the middle of a lot of the tribe dynamics, really on both of her tribes, both her starting tribe and later her swap tribe. And again, she's in the majority for pretty much all of those votes. Like she agrees to the Ben blindside, she agrees to the Croc blindside, and she agrees to the second Ben blindside as well. Again, all great stuff there. And again, I feel like coming into the merge, she's coming into a very strong position. She still has Jesse in her corner. She's obviously reuniting with Mark. Obviously, she could align with a lot of people from her original tribe as well, all of which she has relatively good relationships with. And she isn't really being looked at as a target at all. I mean, she is still playing actively, like she is positioning herself in the middle of the tribe here. And we've seen her make plenty of strategic decisions in the pre-merge. Like so, unlike with Jordy, who again has been invisible to an extent during the pre-swap, we've seen Sam like be active across all stages of the game. And again, how much of that you can credit to her exposure in the edit, like it's unclear. But again, it's the information we're going off of. And again, I feel like she's unlikely to be targeted anytime soon. Like so, I feel like there's a lot of upsides to Sam's game position at the moment. Again, she's coming into the merge with allies, and I feel like she has what it takes to navigate through the rest of the game strategically. So I feel like for all those reasons, I feel like right now Sam is playing the best game on Australian Survivor. And there we go. That will do it for this video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. I obviously will continue to do the power rankings every week for Australian Survivor. Now, it is sort of weird because like the broadcast schedule has gone to just 2 episodes a week on Sunday and Monday, as opposed to the 3 episodes that have happened for over the last couple weeks. So I think what I'll do there is just again, they'll probably come out either Tuesday or Wednesday as usual. Like obviously updating that. Obviously, there's other stuff happening, like Celebrity Big Brother just wrapped up, so I plan to do a review and play ranking for that. Stay tuned for that. Amazing Race is wrapping up next week, so obviously I have some more videos for that. Survivor 42 is starting soon, so I'm planning to cover that as well. And Big Brother Canada, they just had a cast release, so I'm excited for that. That starts next week. Stay tuned for that. There is so much happening, and again, I feel like this next 2 weeks really are going to be pretty packed with videos, particularly with seasons wrapping up. But that's just the way things are. But there's just a lot of content to look forward to. So stay tuned for that. But for now, that's the video. See ya.